It all started at what was supposed to be a regular family reunion. You know, the kind where everyone pretends to care about each other's lives while sneaking glances at their phones. I was sipping my third cup of coffee, trying to stay awake through Aunt Mabel's endless tales of her cat's latest antics, when a stranger approached me. He was an older guy, probably in his 60s, with a face that looked like it had seen a lot of life. "Callan Rivers?" he asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and something I couldn't quite place. "Yeah, that's me," I replied, wondering if I should know him. He handed me a worn-out package wrapped in brown paper. "This is from your father," he said, his eyes holding mine for a moment longer than comfortable. "He wanted you to have it." I was about to ask how he knew my dad, but he turned and disappeared into the crowd like a ghost. I stood there, package in hand, feeling the weight of 1,000 questions suddenly pressing down on me. "Me? My name's Cal, by the way. I'm an urban planner," which sounds a lot more exciting than it actually is. Most days, I'm stuck in meetings about zoning laws and public transit routes. But today, I was holding a piece of my father's past, and I had no idea what to do with it. Curiosity got the better of me, and I found a quiet corner to open the package. Inside was a vintage camera, the kind you'd see in old movies, along with several undeveloped film rolls. Weird, right? My dad was never into photography, at least not as far as I knew. I turned the camera over in my hands, noticing a small note tucked into the case. The handwriting was unmistakable, my father's. It simply said, "Find the truth." Short, cryptic, and thoroughly unsettling. I spent the rest of the reunion in a daze, my mind miles away from the chatter around me. Even my brother Nolan's attempts to engage me in conversation went unregistered. Nolan's the peacekeeper in the family, always trying to smooth things over. But today, even he couldn't pull me back from the edge of this mystery. Later that night, after the obligatory hugs and goodbyes, I found myself in my tiny apartment staring at the camera. I decided to develop the film. It was a long shot, but I had to know what my father wanted me to see. A few days later, I picked up the developed photos. My heart pounded as I flipped through them, each image more confusing than the last. There was my father, looking younger and happier than I'd ever seen him, with an unfamiliar woman and a little girl. They looked like a family, but who were they? I couldn't shake the feeling that this was something big, something my mother, Lorraine, would never talk about. She's always been the keeper of secrets, the one who held our family together with an iron grip. But now I was holding a secret of my own, and it was tearing me apart. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. But I knew confronting my mother wouldn't be easy. Lorraine Rivers was not someone you questioned lightly. She had a way of dodging uncomfortable topics with the precision of a seasoned politician. As I sat there, staring at the photos spread out on my coffee table, I felt a mix of emotions: confusion, anticipation, maybe even a little excitement. This was a side of my father I'd never known, a side that had been hidden from me all these years. I had to find out the truth, no matter what it cost. The note had said as much, and I couldn't ignore it. But as I looked at the last photo, a chill ran down my spine. The little girl in the picture had eyes that looked eerily familiar. In that moment, I realized this was just the beginning. There were layers to this story, layers I wasn't sure I was ready to peel back. But I had no choice. Whatever my father had been hiding, whatever my mother refused to acknowledge, I was going to uncover it. I just hoped I was ready for what I might find. I sat at my kitchen table, the photos spread out in front of me like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle with no picture on the box. My mind kept circling back to that little girl with the familiar eyes. I had to talk to my mother, Lorraine, even though I knew it wouldn't be a walk in the park. That evening, I drove over to my childhood home. The place looked the same, comfortable and unassuming, like a Norman Rockwell painting. But now, it felt like a stage set hiding a darker story. Lorraine was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she prepared dinner. The smell of her famous beef stew filled the air, but my appetite was nowhere to be found. "Mom, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly. "About what, dear?" I placed the photos on the table, watching her face for any sign of recognition or surprise. Instead, she just stared at them, her expression unreadable. "Who are they?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lorraine sighed, a sound heavy with years of unspoken words. "Cal, some things are better left in the past." "Not for me," I replied, a little sharper than I intended. "I need to know." She pushed the photos aside, her fingers trembling slightly. "Your father, he had his reasons. It was a different time." "That's not an answer," I said, frustration creeping into my voice. Just then, Nolan walked in, his timing impeccable as always. "What's going on?" he asked, glancing between us. "Cal's digging up old ghosts," Lorraine said, her tone dismissive. Nolan looked at me, a silent plea in his eyes. "Maybe we should just let it go. Calendar, let it go." Incredulous, I said, "There's a whole side of Dad's life we never knew about. How can you be okay with that?" Nolan hesitated, his loyalty to our mother evident. "I just think some things don't need to be dragged out into the light." I shook my head, feeling the gap between us widen. "I can't pretend this doesn't matter." Lorraine stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "Cal, I love you, but this is not something I can discuss. Please just trust me." Her words hung in the air, a plea wrapped in a command. But I couldn't let it go. Not now. Not after everything I'd seen. I nodded more out of respect than agreement and left the house, the weight of unsaid words pressing down on me. Back in my car, I gripped the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. Lorraine's refusal to talk only fueled my determination. There was more to this story, and I was going to find out what. The next day, I called Tessa, my best friend, and the one person who could help me make sense of this mess. We met at our usual spot, a cozy little cafe with the best cinnamon rolls in town. "So what's got you all twisted up?" Tessa asked, her eyes full of concern. I handed her the photos, watching as she flipped through them. My dad had a whole other life, I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Tessa looked up, her expression a mix of sympathy and intrigue. "Wow, Calendar, this is a lot. Tell me about it." I leaned back in my chair, and Lorraine's not talking. "Maybe you need to look at this from a different angle," Tessa suggested, always the problem solver. "Have you thought about finding that little girl? She could have answers." I nodded, the thought already forming in my mind. "I think she might be my half-sister." Tessa raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback. "That's huge. Are you ready for that?" "Not really," I admitted, "but I don't have much of a choice." As we talked, a new plan started to take shape. I needed to find Ivy Monroe, the girl in the photos, and see what she knew. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead I had. Later, as I sat in my car, I felt the weight of the situation pressing down on me. Finding Ivy could open a whole new can of worms, but it was a risk I had to take. The truth was out there, tangled up in my father's past, and I was determined to unravel it, no matter where it led. With a deep breath, I started the engine, feeling the road ahead stretch out like a path to the unknown. I had no idea what I would find, but I knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back now. I found myself standing outside Jasper Hale's modest bungalow, my heart pounding against my ribs like a warning drum. Jasper was my father's old friend, and if anyone could shed light on this mess, it was him. I knocked, the sound echoing in the quiet neighborhood. The door creaked open, revealing Jasper's familiar face, weathered by time and stories untold. He looked at me with a mix of surprise and resignation. "Callan," he said, stepping aside to let me in. Inside, the walls were lined with photographs and newspaper clippings, testament to a life spent chasing stories. I wondered how many of those stories were as tangled as mine. "I need to know about my father," I began, skipping the small talk. "Who was the woman in the photos?" Jasper sighed, a deep, weary sound. "I hoped you wouldn't have to dig this up, but I suppose you deserve the truth." He motioned for me to sit, and I did, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. "Your father and Ivy's mother. They were close," he said, choosing his words carefully. "She was a big part of his life." I nodded, urging him to continue. "And Ivy?" Jasper hesitated, his gaze drifting to a photo on the wall. "Ivy is your half-sister. Calendar, your father loved her mother, but circumstances kept them apart." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had suspected as much, but hearing it aloud made it real. I tried to process the emotions swirling inside me: betrayal, anger, and a deep gnawing sadness. "Why didn't Lorraine ever tell us?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Your mother had her reasons," Jasper replied, not unkindly. "She wanted to protect you and Nolan from the fallout." I stood up, unable to sit still any longer. "Protect us from what?" "The truth." Jasper didn't answer, and I realized it wasn't his place to justify my mother's choices. I thanked him and left, the sound of the door closing behind me echoing in my ears. As I drove away, I felt the weight of my father's secrets pressing down on me. I needed to find Ivy, to hear her side of the story. But as I reached for my phone to search for her contact information, a thought stopped me cold. What if she didn't want to be found? What if she resented my family as much as I was beginning to resent the lies? I shook off the doubt and dialed the number I'd found online, my heart racing with each ring. Finally, a voice answered, cautious and guarded. "Hello, Ivy Monroe?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is Callan Rivers. I think we need to talk." There was a pause long enough for me to wonder if she'd hang up. "I've been expecting your call," she said finally, her tone unreadable. "Meet me at the coffee shop on Main Street tomorrow." The line went dead, and I sat there, the silence in my car suddenly deafening. Ivy was expecting me. That could mean anything, and none of it was comforting. The next day, I walked into the coffee shop, scanning the room for Ivy. She was sitting in a corner, her eyes fixed on the window. She looked up as I approached, her expression a mix of curiosity and weariness. "Callan," she said, not quite a question, but not a statement either. "Ivy," I replied, taking a seat across from her. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken words. "So, you're my brother," she said, her voice carrying a hint of disbelief. "Half-brother," I corrected, trying to keep things light, though the weight of the truth was anything but. Ivy studied me, her gaze piercing. "What do you want, Callan?" I want to know the truth, I said simply. About our father, about us. Us? She nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. I want that too. We talked for what felt like hours, peeling back layers of our shared history. Ivy told me about her mother, about the life she'd lived in the shadow of our father's choices. As I listened, I realized that we were both victims of a story we hadn't written. When we finally parted ways, I felt a strange sense of relief. Ivy wasn't a threat. She was a piece of the puzzle I'd been missing, a link to a past that was slowly coming into focus. But as I walked back to my car, the weight of what lay ahead settled over me. Lorraine's secrets were unraveling, and with them, the fragile piece of our family. I knew the road ahead would be rocky, but I also knew I couldn't turn back. The truth was out there, and I was determined to find it, no matter the cost. I was sitting in my apartment, staring at the photos again, when my phone buzzed with a message from Tessa. Need to talk. Meet at the park, it read. I grabbed my jacket, eager for a distraction from the storm brewing in my head. The park was quiet this time of day, and I found Tessa on our usual bench, her expression serious. What's up? I asked, trying to keep my tone light. She handed me a folded piece of paper. I did some digging. This might help. I unfolded it, revealing an old newspaper clipping. The headline read, Local woman's sudden death leaves community in shock. Beneath it was a photo of Ivy's mother. My heart sank as I skimmed the article detailing her unexpected passing years ago. What does this mean? I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. Tessa looked at me, her eyes searching mine. I think it means there's more to this story than we thought. Maybe Ivy's mother didn't just fade away from your father's life. Maybe something else happened. I nodded, my mind racing. This new information changed everything. If Ivy's mother's death wasn't as straightforward as it seemed, then my father's involvement could be more complicated than I'd imagined. Back at home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. I needed to talk to Lorraine again, but this time I was going to push harder for answers. The next day, I found myself back at my childhood home. The familiar surroundings were now tinged with a sense of betrayal. Lorraine was in the living room, flipping through an old photo album. Mom, we need to talk, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up, her eyes weary. About what, Callan? I handed her the newspaper clipping, watching her reaction closely. Her face paled, and she set the paper down with trembling hands. Where did you get this? Tessa found it, I replied, not backing down. What aren't you telling me? Lorraine sighed, a sound filled with years of unspoken truths. Your father and Ivy's mother, they were in love, but it was complicated. Her death was unexpected, and it broke him. Was he involved? I asked, the question hanging in the air like a dark cloud. No, she said, her voice firm, but he blamed himself. He always thought he could have done something to prevent it. I watched her, searching for any hint of deception, but all I saw was a mother trying to protect her family. Why didn't you tell us? Because I wanted to shield you from the pain, Lorraine said, her voice cracking. I didn't want you to carry the burden of his choices. I nodded, understanding her motives, but still feeling the sting of her secrecy. I need to know everything, Mom. I can't keep living in the dark. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. I'll tell you everything, Callan. Just promise me you'll be careful. There are things in the past best left buried. As I left, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. I was finally getting answers, but the truth was more tangled than I'd imagined. Later, I met Ivy again, this time at a small diner on the edge of town. The place was nearly empty, giving us the privacy we needed. "I found something," I said, sliding the newspaper clipping across the table. Ivy scanned it, her expression unreadable. I knew she died suddenly, but I never knew the details. "Lorraine says our father blamed himself," I said, watching her closely. "Do you think there's more to it?" Ivy looked up, her eyes meeting mine. "I don't know, but I think we need to find out." We sat in silence, the weight of our shared history pressing down on us. I realized then that I wasn't just seeking the truth for myself. I was doing it for Ivy too, and for the family we never knew we had. As we parted ways, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I was no longer just unraveling my father's past. I was piecing together a future where Ivy and I could find closure. But as I drove home, a new thought crept in. What if the truth was more dangerous than I'd anticipated? What if uncovering it put us all at risk? The stakes had never been higher, and I knew I had to tread carefully. The past was a powerful thing, and I was about to dive headfirst into its depths, hoping to emerge with the answers we all needed. The days following my last conversation with Lorraine were a blur of restless nights and unanswered questions. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a precipice, looking down into a chasm filled with my family's hidden truths. I needed to take the plunge, but I was terrified of what I might find at the bottom. I met with Nolan at a local bar, hoping for some brotherly advice, or at least a distraction. The place was dimly lit, filled with the low hum of conversations and clinking glasses. Nolan was already there, nursing a beer and staring into space. "Hey," I said, sliding onto the stool next to him. "Hey," he replied, glancing at me with a hint of concern. "You look like you've been through the ringer." I shrugged, signaling the bartender for a drink. "You could say that." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us like a thick fog. Finally, Nolan spoke, his voice low and hesitant. "So, what's going on with Ivy?" I took a sip of my drink, feeling the burn of the alcohol steady my nerves. "I met her. She's not what I expected." Nolan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "And Lorraine? She's finally starting to open up, but there's still so much she's not telling me," I admitted, frustration creeping into my voice. Nolan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You know she's trying to protect us, right?" "Protect us from what exactly?" I shot back, the words sharper than I intended. "The truth. Our own family." Nolan didn't answer, and I realized he was just as caught in this web as I was. We were both trying to navigate a maze with no clear exit. As we left the bar, I felt a strange mix of determination and dread. I needed to talk to Ivy again to see if she could help me piece together the fragments of our father's past. But as I reached for my phone, a message popped up from an unknown number. "Stop digging. Some things are better left buried." My heart skipped a beat, a cold sweat breaking out on my skin. I showed the message to Nolan, who frowned, his brow furrowed with concern. "What do you think it means?" "I don't know," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But it feels like a warning." The message only fueled my resolve. I couldn't back down now, not when I was so close to the truth. I arranged to meet Ivy again, this time at a quiet spot near the river, where we wouldn't be overheard. When I arrived, Ivy was already there, her expression guarded. "You got the message too, didn't you?" she asked, skipping any pretense of small talk. I nodded, the memory of the words still fresh in my mind. "Do you have any idea who it could be from?" Ivy shook her head, her eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. No, but it means we're onto something. We spent the next hour piecing together everything we knew, trying to form a coherent picture from the scattered pieces of our father's life. As we talked, I realized how much we both needed answers, not just for ourselves, but for the families we never knew we had. But just as we were starting to make progress, Ivy's phone buzzed with another message. She read it, her face going pale. "It's my mother's old contact," she said, her voice trembling. "Someone's using it to send these warnings." The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. Our pursuit of the truth had stirred up something, or someone, intent on keeping the past hidden. I looked at Ivy, seeing the fear mirrored in her eyes, and knew we had to be careful. As we parted ways, I felt the weight of the decision looming over me. I could keep pushing, risk everything to uncover the truth, or I could step back and protect what little peace we had left. But deep down, I knew I couldn't walk away. The stakes were too high, and the cost of ignorance too great. I drove home, the road blurring before me as I grappled with the enormity of what lay ahead. My perception of justice and revenge was shifting, the lines between them blurring. As I delved deeper into my father's past, in seeking the truth, I was also seeking redemption, not just for him, but for myself and the family we were trying to rebuild. The journey was far from over, and I had no idea what I would find at the end. But one thing was certain: I couldn't stop now. Not when the truth was so close, and the past was finally ready to reveal its secrets. The day of the family gathering arrived, and I felt like I was walking into a storm with no umbrella. Ivy had agreed to come, but the tension between us was palpable. My mind was a whirlpool of anxiety and dread, knowing that this confrontation could either tear us apart or finally bring us the closure we needed. As we arrived at Lorraine's house, Ivy's grip on her purse tightened. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice barely masking her apprehension. "No," I admitted, "but we need to do this." The door opened, and Lorraine greeted us with a smile that quickly faded as she saw Ivy. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of fear. "Colin, what's going on?" "Ivy's here because she deserves to know the truth," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. Nolan appeared in the hallway, his expression one of confusion and concern. "Cal, what's happening?" I took a deep breath, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. "Ivy is our sister, Nolan, our father's daughter." The room fell silent, the air thick with unspoken emotions. Lorraine's face was a mask of shock, and Nolan looked like he'd been hit by a freight train. "I didn't want it to come out like this," Lorraine said, her voice trembling. "I was trying to protect you." "Protect us from what?" I asked, my frustration boiling over. "The truth." Ivy stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to understand where I come from." Lorraine's eyes softened, but the tension remained. "I knew about you, Ivy. I knew about your mother. We were friends once, but things got complicated." Nolan looked between us, his loyalty torn. "Mom, why didn't you tell us?" "I thought it was best to keep it buried," Lorraine said, tears glistening in her eyes. "I didn't want you to suffer because of your father's mistakes." The room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing tighter with every word. I had brought Ivy here seeking answers, but all I found were more questions, more tangled threads in a web I couldn't unravel. Just as I was about to speak, My phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at the screen, my heart sinking as I read the message. You've gone too far. Stop now or face the consequences. I showed the message to Ivy, her face paling as she read it. Who's doing this? She whispered, fear creeping into her voice. I don't know, I admitted, feeling the ground shift beneath me. But we're not safe. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. Whoever was behind these threats wasn't going to stop until we backed down. But backing down wasn't an option. Not anymore. Ivy and I left the house, leaving Lorraine and Nolan to grapple with the fallout. As we walked down the street, the weight of the world pressed on our shoulders. I felt like I was teetering on the edge of a cliff. We can't give up, Ivy said, her voice resolute despite everything. I know, I replied, though the words felt hollow. But I don't know what to do next. As we parted ways, I felt a sense of hopelessness settle over me. The truth was within reach, but the cost of uncovering it seemed higher than ever. My ideas of revenge and justice were crumbling under the weight of reality, and I was left questioning everything I thought I knew. Back home, I sat in the dark, the silence deafening. I was at my lowest point, the path ahead obscured by shadows and uncertainty. But somewhere in the depths of my despair, a flicker of determination sparked. I couldn't let fear dictate my actions. I had to keep pushing, keep fighting for the truth, no matter what it cost. The stakes had never been higher, and the risks were mounting. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't alone. Ivy and I were in this together, and together we would find a way to bring the past into the light, no matter how dark the journey became. The night of the confrontation felt charged with electricity, the air thick with anticipation and fear. I stood outside Lorraine's house, my heart pounding like a war drum. Ivy was beside me, her expression a mix of determination and apprehension. We were about to face the past head-on, and there was no turning back. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Lorraine sat in the living room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Nolan hovered nearby, his face a mask of conflict. The room was silent, the only sound the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the corner. I took a deep breath, stepping forward. Mom, we need to talk, I began. My voice steadied despite the storm inside me. Lorraine looked up, her eyes meeting mine. Colin, please, let's not do this here. No, I said firmly. We've been running from this for too long. It's time to face it. Ivy stepped forward, her voice calm, but resolute. I deserve to know the truth, Lorraine, about my mother, about our father. Lorraine's eyes flickered with a mix of emotions, fear, regret, and something else I couldn't quite place. I was trying to protect you all, she said, her voice breaking, by keeping secrets. I challenged her, feeling the weight of years of deception pressing down on us. We deserve to know the truth, even if it's painful. Nolan stepped in, his tone conciliatory. Mom, we're not here to hurt you. We just want to understand. The silence stretched heavy and oppressive until Lorraine finally spoke. Your father loved Ivy's mother. They were planning to be together, but then she died, and everything fell apart. Ivy's face was a mask of shock, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Why didn't you tell us? Because I was afraid, Lorraine admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, afraid of what it would do to our family. The room was silent again, the weight of Lorraine's words settling over us like a shroud. I felt a mix of anger and empathy, understanding her motives, but still grappling with the consequences of her choices. Just as I was about to speak, the doorbell rang. Its sound sliced through the tension like a knife. We all turned, confusion etched on our faces. Nolan opened the door, revealing Jasper Hale standing there, his expression grave. "I think it's time we all had a talk," he said, stepping inside. Jasper's presence was unexpected, but somehow fitting. He had been a part of this story from the beginning, and now he was here to help us find closure. "I've been keeping something from you," Jasper said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Your father didn't just love Ivy's mother. He was trying to protect her from someone." The room went still, the implications of Jasper's words sinking in. "Who?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jasper hesitated, his eyes meeting Lorraine's. "Someone who didn't want their relationship to succeed. Someone who had a lot to lose if the truth came out." Lorraine's face turned pale, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. "I didn't know," she said, her voice trembling. "I swear, I didn't know." The truth hit me like a tidal wave. Our father's love for Ivy's mother had been a threat to someone who had gone to great lengths to keep them apart. The warnings we'd received, the threats, it all made sense now. Ivy looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and determination. "We need to find out who's behind this." I nodded, the path ahead suddenly clear. We had to keep digging, keep fighting for the truth, no matter what it cost. As we stood there, united in our resolve, I felt a sense of closure beginning to form. We were finally facing the truth, and though the journey was far from over, we were no longer alone. Core themes of revenge and justice had brought us to this moment, forcing us to confront the past and find a way forward. And as we prepared to face whatever lay ahead, I knew that together, we could overcome anything. The days following the confrontation were a whirlwind of emotions and revelations. Ivy and I spent hours piecing together the fragments of our father's past. The puzzle slowly formed, a picture that, while not perfect, was clearer than before. We'd unearthed truths that had been buried for too long, and now it was time to see what we could build from the rubble. I found myself back at Lorraine's house. The familiar surroundings were now tinged with a sense of hope. Lorraine sat at the kitchen table, her expression a mix of apprehension and resolve. Nolan was beside her, his presence a steadying force. "Thank you for coming," Lorraine said, her voice soft but steady. I nodded, taking a seat across from her. "We need to talk about where we go from here." Lorraine glanced at Nolan, then back at me. "I want to make things right for all of us." Ivy arrived a few moments later, her entrance quiet, but significant. She took a seat beside me, her presence a reminder of the journey we'd shared. "I found something," she said, placing an envelope on the table. The envelope was worn, the paper yellowed with age. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Ivy's mother's. Lorraine's eyes widened as she picked it up, her fingers trembling slightly. "Dear Lorraine," she read aloud, her voice catching on the words, "I hope this letter finds you well. I know things have been difficult, but I want you to know that I never intended to come between you and your family. I hope one day we can find a way to heal." The room was silent as Lorraine finished reading, the weight of the letter settling over us. It was a message of regret, but also of hope, a hope that we could find a way to move forward together. Lorraine looked up, tears in her eyes. I had no idea she felt this way. I've been holding on to so much anger, and it blinded me to what really mattered. Ivy reached across the table, placing her hand over Lorraine's. "We can't change the past, but we can choose how we move forward. In that moment, I saw the possibility of reconciliation, the chance to build something new from the ashes of the past. It wouldn't be easy, but it was a start. As we talked, the conversation turned to our father, his choices, and the legacy he'd left behind. We didn't have all the answers, but we had each other, and that was enough. Later, as I stood outside with Ivy, I felt a sense of closure beginning to take root. "Do you think we'll ever know the whole story?" she asked, her gaze thoughtful. "Maybe not," I admitted, "but we've come this far. That has to count for something." We stood in silence, the weight of the journey behind us and the promise of a new beginning ahead. The themes of revenge and justice had brought us to this point, forcing us to confront the past and find a way forward. And while some questions remained unanswered, the path ahead felt brighter. As Ivy and I parted ways, I felt a newfound sense of peace. I had come searching for the truth, and while the journey had been fraught with challenges, it had also brought me closer to my family. We were no longer defined by the secrets of the past, but by the bonds we were forging in the present. As I drove home, the road stretching out before me like a promise of new beginnings, I felt a sense of gratitude for the journey we'd undertaken. The past would always be a part of us, but it no longer held the power to dictate our future. And as I pulled into my driveway, I couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead. The story of our family was still being written, and while the path was uncertain, I knew we would face it together, united by the truths we'd uncovered and the hope of what was yet to come.